Hi, Rod Fleming in the sunny Philippines here. I do hope you're all very well. Nice to see you again. Now, we're doing a quick one today. First of all, I'll update you all about HSTS. The date for the launch of that site is now the 1st of November. We're almost there. I want to do some final refinements of the site design, basically get it working exactly the way I would like it to. And we've been filling up lots of the material that I want to be available, but it will be available by the 1st of November. I've chosen that date because it's All Saints' Day, and it's a propitious date. Now, today, this morning, I saw on the BBC news pages, I don't find the BBC that reliable. It's kind of left biased, but it's not bad, you know. You avoid accusations of being right-wing biased if you look at the BBC, you know. And they've quoted a story in the London Times. I haven't seen it elsewhere, but it will be elsewhere. Reporting, and it says that a row has broken out over a memo that has allegedly been released or is in preparation by Donald Trump, the great president of the United States. And in this, he challenges the orthodoxy which was put in place during the Obama administration era that gender is what qualifies for legal protection and not sex. And according to the story, the memo allegedly says, and I'll paraphrase here, that sex is fixed for life, it's defined before birth, and it can be observed before or shortly after birth. The memo does not mention, in the quotes I've seen, in the reports I've seen, it's a couple, it doesn't mention gender at all. The word doesn't appear. It only talks about sex, and that's how it should be. We'll have to ask why this is such a controversial memo. The left is basically going crazy about it right now. Sex is a function of chromosomes. Your sex chromosome define what your sex will be. Simple as that. And that is set at the moment of conception. It can never be changed. If you're male, at conception, if you're conceived male, that's an X and Y chromosome, you're always going to be male. Similarly, if it's two X's, you're always going to be female. Now, there are certain intersex conditions where there are multiple sex chromosomes. So you can have XY, XXY, XYY, and various other combinations that are very similar, but are also extremely rare. The most common of these is a syndrome called Klinefelter's, in which it's normally observed at birth because of abnormalities in the genitalia. But it's genetic, right? It's also fixed at birth. You can't change it. Now, the problem that we have is the conflation of gender with sex, and this has been really commonplace. It comes partly from an American reluctance to use the word sex, and so they use gender, when what they actually mean is sex, you know? And it's important to understand that sex is a biological idea. You know, it's physical. It's what you physically are. Okay? Gender is innate. It's not just a social construct. It is innate. But it is a system of appearances and behaviors, preferences, and things like that define you as a person. So, whereas sex is about hard physical things, gender's a bit different, and we'll come to it. We'll come to that. Now, Barack Obama, absolutely the worst recent US president, deliberately conflated sex with gender, such that sex would be taken as gender, right? And so everyone is going to be defined by this gender idea rather than by biology, in terms of their legal protections. Okay? But even worse, it's worse than that, because this wasn't even gender as it's normally meant, but a thing called gender identity, which is basically meaningless. That is like, oh, I feel myself to be a woman. I mean, it's nonsense, you know. I feel myself to be Napoleon Solo. It doesn't make me the man from U.N.C.L.E. Unfortunately, there's this thing called queer theory, which basically it's just a pile of absolute rubbish that has been dribbling out of humanities schools for decades, and it really needs to be got rid of. Anyway, and that explains why, by the way, Obama did this. Obama is an academic. And he had been obviously infected by this set of postmodernist, neo-socialist, left-wing ideas, basically cultural Marxism, you might like to call it, long before he became president, and immediately set about trying to get these ideas enacted into law. And this was one way he tried to do it. If you remember last year, one of Donald Trump's early moves was to change the rules regarding to Title IX. And Title IX is a thing which says that basically that no federal funding may be applied to any program that discriminates on the basis of sex. And Obama had changed that to discriminates on the basis of gender. He had said sex will be taken to mean gender in this document, and Trump had already reversed that. He'd already started to drain this swamp, and this is the next step that he's making now. And the bottom line is, you can call yourself anything you want. It's not a problem, it's a free world. But you can't expect legal protection. And even worse, you can't expect to be able to undermine the legal protections of others on the basis of your own personal feelings. That you feel you are a woman, for example, or you feel you are a man, right? The law has to deal with concrete facts. But that's what's happened. We have now achieved the appalling situation, and I'll use the British example, where men, that's autogynephilic transvestite men, have committed sexual assault on women, been convicted for it, later changed their gender markers through the Gender Recognition Act, committed another offence, went to prison, were sent to a female prison, and immediately started assaulting the women in it. And that's what happens when you get to this level of insanity. Okay, so we're going to have to deal with this in a different way. And Trump, I don't think everything Trump does is right, but on this he's correct. Sex is immutable and innate. Gender is a function of sexuality, not directly of sex. The fact is that feminine homosexual males have female sexuality, and masculine homosexual females have male sexuality. Feminine homosexual males are attracted to masculinity. They want to play the submissive role in sex. They tend to adopt feminized behaviors and mannerisms. Dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. All of this is a function of their sexuality. They want men. And we know, as humans, we know what we need to do to attract men. And if you want to attract men, you look like a woman. Right? They want straight men. Now, gender is the method through which we advertise our sexuality to others. You know, that's how you tell someone else. I'm a guy. I've always been a guy. I've always liked women. So I've always looked and behaved like a guy. You know, what would be the point in dressing up as a woman? Because I wouldn't attract any women. It's just dumb, you know. But unfortunately, again, USicans have this puritanical idea that nothing can be really about sex. That's not allowed to. Mustn't frighten the children. So, let's go back. Those people with those male people with female sexuality will have feminine gender because that's what they want to express, the fact that they have female sexuality and they want a man. And those with male sexuality will have masculine gender because they want to attract women. If these individuals transition, then they should properly be called transsexual, right? Because they transcend their sex. Their sexuality is inverted. It's not what you would expect of their physical sex. They are literally in the wrong body. Okay? There's no doubt about this. And on my sites and here, I call these individuals HSTS, or homosexual transsexuals, or sometimes just transsexual. They can be either sex. They can be male, in which case we call them trans women, or they can be female, in which case they're called trans men. So far, so good. In order to be transsexual, two conditions must apply, right? They must apply. You must be homosexual with regard to birth sex, right? That's a given. That's a basic. You must be. Excuse me, there's somebody testing his motorbike outside. And that means you have the sexuality of the opposite sex, right? And you must experience gender dysphoria. right? If you try to live in the gender normally associated with your birth sex. That's it. Nobody else qualifies. Now, I know if you go into the sewer called Tumblr, you'll find lots of people saying that they're trans, and gender dysphoria is not required to be trans. Well, I don't give a shit. I don't care what trans is. We're talking about transsexuals here, right? HSTS. All of the rest of these idiots can go and do whatever they like. I see no excuse for giving them special privileges or special considerations or protections. They're just fashionistas. Right? Now, with regard to those who actually do have gender dysphoria comes in two forms, homosexual and non-homosexual, and again, it can be male or female, so there's four different types. We've discussed the homosexual people with homosexual gender dysphoria, that's the HSTS. Non-homosexual transitioners are never transsexual, right? They're just not, because they don't transcend their sex. They have exactly the same sexuality as all the men in the rest of the planet, if they're, all the straight men that is, if they're male. Right? There's nothing that differentiates them from other males except they like to dress up in women's clothing. That's it. You know, and they might have this idea in their head that, oh, I'm really a woman. But actually, that is because they have a mental disorder called autogynephilia, which is complex, and I've done loads and loads of videos on that, so please go and look at them. These people, the non-homosexual transitioners, should really be called transvestites, because all they really change is their appearance. And that applies to people like Julia Serrano, Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, Justin Riley Dennis. It just goes on and on and on. There's just loads of them. And they wouldn't pass as a woman on a dark night in the rain. It's just the way it is. Fashion transistas, transitioners, transtrenderists, feminists on steroids, and the other artifacts of popular culture also are never transsexual. We are not talking about them when we talk about here. We're talking about HSTS. Those people, these others, are neither homosexual nor do they experience gender dysphoria. And actually, these are political or fashion expressions, which are largely a function of postmodernist ideas, which have been inculcated into young people through a broken Western education system. And make no mistake, the education system that is operating in the Anglophone West now, and increasingly across Western Europe, is broken. It has been completely corrupted by postmodernist ideas, by cultural Marxism, and it's broken. We're going to have to fix it, because we're raising generations of people who actually don't know what life is about. They've been pumped full of ridiculous propaganda. Transsexuals deserve special support. Why? Why do they need the special support? And I'll tell you. There's a lot of evidence, a really large amount of evidence, that supports the claim that their inverted sexuality is innate. As I've already mentioned, we'll start seeing signs of this inverted sexuality around the age of 2 to 4, when other children are beginning to express themselves in gender-conforming manners. The HSTS will be beginning to express themselves in gender non-conforming manners, right? And in severe cases, this will actually turn into a thing called childhood gender dysphoria, which is an extreme stress if you're a boy, going out dressed and looking like a boy, and you'd be, no, Mum, I'm a girl, I can't go to school like this. You know, it becomes really, really difficult, and it's very traumatic both for the child and the adults around her who don't know what's going on. You know, small amounts of childhood gender non-conformity are completely normal, and most children grow out of it. You know, they just role play. They just experiment with what they are, who they are, and it goes away. You know, most of them aren't even homosexual. Most of them end up just being ordinary straight people, because they've explored that part of their life that they thought, well, maybe what's that girl stuff? And they've had a look at it, they've played it and explored it in role play, and they've gone, that's not me. So as their sexuality and therefore their gender crystallizes, it crystallizes in a normative manner. But for the people we're talking about, this is not the case. And we can see that it's not the case beginning at the age of 2. Now, that does not mean that you can look at a 2-year-old child who's, expressing gender non-conforming behaviours and say, oh, that's going to be an HSTS. You cannot do that. And the people who say you can it's a level of oversimplification that is actually irresponsible. What you need to do is wait and see, and you give it many, many years. You know, if this child is still doing this and it's got more intense, more insistent, it's always consistent 10 years later, then there is a very good chance that you're looking at HSTS. You know? But it takes you those 10 years to figure that one out. Because you have to watch, you observe, you try and be as neutral as you can, you try not to pressure people, you try and be supportive and you try and be helpful and not allow them to be exposed to harm or criticism. But at the end of the day, you've got to let them develop in the way that is appropriate for them. So we can tell that, you know, this is a particular class of people. They're not choosing to be the way they are, they just are that way. Now, HSTS trans women in particular present no threat at all to women because they're sexually averse to women. They're not attracted to women. They're actually sexually repulsed by women because they're attracted to men. Since they don't represent a threat and they both appear to be women, they're very, very convincing, and they are subject to the same or higher risks as women, then surely we should be protecting them in the way that women are protected. And the people who are arguing against this, by the way, are rabid feminists. Amazing, you know, the very people who hate Trump the most. Isn't it interesting? So one thing we have to do to try and be fair to these people, to the HSTS, is we have to debunk this whole fashionable notion that trans are all the same. They're not. They just aren't. And it also means that self-identification has to be rejected. We have to get rid of it in favour of social identification. Now, I'm not in favour of returning to the situation that obtained, for example, in Germany between the wars, where transsexuals got police permits, because everybody in Germany had to carry so many papers it wasn't true. And if you were transsexual, you would get a lot of hassle from the police. But people like Manus Hirschfeld, for example, and people at his clinic in Berlin would arrange for them to get legal papers that said, no, this is actually a transsexual person, and the police would go, aye, okay, fine. You know? Well, we're not asking to go back to that. We just wanted to go something a little bit more concrete than, you know, I say I'm a woman. Right? We have to recognise, to be fair to everyone, we have to recognise that in the first place, women have a legitimate right to protection, right, from sexual assault. And secondly, we have to recognise that the people who assault women, if they assault women at all, are likely to be male. Okay? So, HSTS are the only exception who should be given the same protections and benefits as women, because really they are inverted, they are women, or inversely, they are men. None of the other trans categories could get this support. Autogynephilic non-homosexual males, no. Non-homosexual females, no. Those people have non-homosexual gender dysphoria, those ones. The males have a disorder called autogynephilia, which leads them to fetishize the idea of being women. And in females, non-homosexual gender dysphoria, it's not very well understood, but it seems to stem from a desire to live in the social role of a man, while still being a woman. And you'll find that these people they typically are very strong feminists. And they think that men have stitched up society to be, you know, against women. And the way around that is to become men and live as men. And then they start harassing gay males because it's like, you know, I'm still want men, but straight men won't come near me. Obviously not, because you're appearing to be too masculine. And you've lost all the sexually attractive attributes that you might have had you remained a woman. And so they then start to pursue gay men, and gay men get really in a state about this, because, you know, like, as there's a big trend on the internet a few years ago, because saying, you know, I'm homosexual, not homogender, you all. And they, you know, I've been a little bit critical of these people in the past, but they've got a point. They've definitely got a point. It's not reasonable for this to happen. It's no more reasonable for a woman who is non-homosexual, takes steroids, dresses as a man, to predate on genuinely homosexual males. That's no more acceptable than for a non-homosexual man with autogynephilia, dresses as a woman, takes hormones maybe, and then pursues women and says, oh, but I'm a lesbian. You know, we have a lesbian relationship. And the lesbians are going, no, I don't want a guy, I don't want and you've got a penis. Don't be ridiculous. you know, these are not reasonable. They're not reasonable positions to take. Transsexuals can always be identified by behaviour. You know, we have to get rid of the idea of self-identification for the reasons I've just explained. That you can call yourself a woman, but still have a man's sex drive. Which, you know, how does that get you forward? You're still, you know, a sexual predator as far as women are concerned. So this identification is really easy, and it can always be made, or at least usually be made, around or even before puberty. I mean, you'll know that the HSTS child that you've got has been gender non-conforming for years, and it's getting more and more insistent. You know, it's always wise to wait till just after puberty, because changes can occur at puberty, and really that's the point at which sexuality and therefore gender really start to crystallise and start to fix. Prior to that, there's just not enough of the sex hormones in the body for sexuality to be really crystallised. And in children under pubertal age, their sexuality is very fluid, and they should just really be left alone, you know. By the time the puberty has happened, particularly in boys, when it's really a bang, you know, it's a big, heavy thump of testosterone, their sexuality will crystallise very, very quickly. And although there might be specific details that, you know, whether you like blondes or brunettes, that take a little bit longer to fix, the desire to have a same-sex partner will be quite clearly fixed very shortly after puberty. And if this is the case, and the gender dysphoria is continuing, it's getting stronger, and it's really insistent, you've got an HSTS child there, and you need to help them, you know. We don't, by the way, we don't know, we've got to be a little careful here, because we don't know. There is evidence that some people change at puberty, but we don't really know how much of this is to do with coercion. They're being coerced by parents, by teachers, even, I'm afraid, by professionals in the medical and psychiatric businesses, trying to persuade them to this idea that, you know, gay is always better. Well, that is a complete canard. It's a lie. I can tell you, I live in a place where it's completely obvious that gay is not better. It might not be worse, but it's certainly not better. So that means that self-identification is totally redundant for transsexuals. They don't need to self-identify. Anybody looking at them will identify them as the opposite sex, because they pass so well, you know. Unless they've been primed, you know, unless you said, oh, you know, there's two people going to walk into this room now and one of them's a transsexual, well, maybe you'll get it that time. But if you just meet them in a crowd of people, you are not going to know. You're just not going to know. And trust me, I know an awful lot of these people. You're never going to know. No, and especially if you're somebody who doesn't happen to have a transsexual girlfriend and know lots of trans people, no way would you know. So we then need to look at the potential backlash of this Trump memo. So if the reporting is correct, it will at least apply logic to a confused situation. Just as it did when he clarified the Title IX situation in the same way. Gender means sex was always wrong, and that gender was whatever the individual that said it was. It was completely crazy, and you can't have a legal situation that works on that basis. Sex is not defined by gender, right? Gender is defined by sexuality, but sex does not define sexuality. You can have an inversion. It's quite possible. So that means that, because we're talking about sex here, a pre-operative trans woman, if she still has a penis, it's still a male organ. Sorry, girls, it is. You know, and we kind of rationalise that and we accept that, but at the bottom line, on a biological level, that's male. You know, and you can't get away with that. We need a far more nuanced and subtle understanding, especially if you, which you'll learn, I'll tell you very quickly, if you happen to be in a relationship with an HSTS. So I think that while Trump's intervention, if correct as reported, I think it's welcome in many ways because it's clarification. It does present HSTS and their supporters, which hopefully is us, with a bit of a problem. HSTS are already under attack from the transphobic gender critical movement. Young HSTS, on the other hand, desperately need to be assisted to transition, if that's the appropriate course for them, and it's what they want to do during their adolescence. And that's particularly the case for males, because otherwise they may masculinize to the point where they can't pass as women, and then you've just ruined their lives. Okay, you've told them that you're going to have to be a gay boy and join the gay meat market. And, you know, come on, we're going to do another video piece and some articles about the nature of the new gay man meat market. But if you're a parent, ask yourself, if you want your child, so assuming we're talking about a boy here, just for example, if you've got a boy child who's obviously HSTS, do you want him to become a girl, to find a nice man, settle down, and have a bunch of dogs, or be part of this risk-taking lifestyle that is notorious for promiscuity, sexually transmitted diseases, and basically, you know, emotional abuse? I mean, ask yourself, what's better, to have a normal life as a normal woman, or to join the new gay man? I know no problem with me. I know exactly what I would say. The waters have been so muddied and so confused by the activities of trans activists, remember, who are not themselves transsexual, that emotions on both sides are running high. Most trans activists, you'll find, are either non-homosexual males or non-homosexual females. HSTS are rarely involved in this kind of trans activism. And I've said before, I've given her the honours before, Blair White, wonderful girl, there she is, she's standing up there banging the drum. But there are very, very, very few of them, because mostly HSTS just blend. In the West, anyway. This is not the same in Asia, where the transphobia is lower. But in the West, where the most dangerous thing that an HSTS trans woman can do is let people know that she's trans, or transsexual, to be precise, then they vanish. They just go. So the activists, the ones that are doing the shouting and the politics, the ones you see on television all the time, none of them are homosexual transsexuals. None of them are actually transsexual at all. They're all transvestites. Every single one of them. With those few exceptions I mentioned. Right. So here's a few facts that we do know, and we can be clear about. You have to be homosexual with regard to both sex to be transsexual, right? Male transsexuals do not present a risk to women. They just don't. Only a small proportion of the so-called trans population in the West is actually transsexual. And really, all the transtrenders and the transistas and the fashionistas and the lesbians on steroids and the non-homosexuals, none of them are transsexual. Right? But the real transsexuals, the HSTS, are the weakest and most vulnerable group in society. And that remains the case. They're targeted for abuse by homophobes and transphobes, by radical feminists and their new gay man allies, by quack doctors, because there are still medical and psychological professionals out there who say, no, you must never be allowed to transition under any circumstances. That's child abuse. That's abusive. Right? Traditionalist religion, which does not accommodate them, which is terrible. And last but not least, well, let's just say teachers and professionals who use mind control techniques to crush the will of the individuals that they are supposed to be educating, shall we say. Right, so Trump is absolutely right to define sex as a physical characteristic that cannot be modified. He's right. But we must remember that the USA is an outlier culture informed by puritanical anti-sex sentiments, rabid feminism, and shocking levels of homophobia and transphobia. Being transsexual is not a fashion, right? It's not something you can change. It's what transsexuals actually are. And they need all the help we can give them. Just to repeat, a transsexual is actually born in the wrong body, insofar as that counts. Transsexuals, male to feminine transsexuals, are, in all effective purposes, women. But they were born in male bodies. And we have to help them resolve that. It's not so many people that it's going to cause a problem, people. It just isn't. So anyway, that's my views on the Trump thing. I'll keep you updated on all about HSTS, but it does look like this is coming to a head and there's going to be much more trouble. It's really horrible at the moment to see how the forces of rabid feminism and new gay man conservatism are coming together with extremist positions on the traditional right, basically to crush the weakest people in society. I'm not convinced that's what Trump is trying to do, by the way. I think he's just trying to introduce some common sense, but we have to be aware of how this might be used. So, see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Hope you have